Today, I'd like to discuss publishing in general, but I'm also going to speak about publishing with Intellect books and journals more specifically. I plan to discuss a number of things, including choosing the right publisher or the right publication, the right journal, that kind of thing, submitting an article to a journal, and also submitting book proposals and the book proposal process. I would like the format to be informal, but the workshop will be in rough sections, and I plan to leave time for questions at the end of each section. After speaking to Jeanette, it seems like the best thing to do would be for you to pop your questions into the chat function, and then we'll answer them at the end of the session. But intermittently through the session, I'll also try and get round to any that are relevant to what I'm currently talking about. I mean, in publishing as well, there's a lot of abbreviations, acronyms. There's a lot of jargon. So if you don't understand something, or if you've not heard of a certain term, this would be a really good opportunity to kind of to question what I'm talking about. What does that mean? What is peer review? What is open access? Or what are these more minutiae and niche terms as well? So don't be afraid to ask. Any questions are valid, and I'm here to help in any way that I can. So please do just ask as much and as many questions as you can. So who am I? So my name is James Campbell, and I oversee international marketing, but also international acquisitions for Intellect books and journals. Intellect is headquartered in the UK, but we're very much an international publisher. I'm currently based in Brooklyn in New York, but I've worked in international publishing for over 15 years now. I've had many roles during my career. I've started off as a production assistant. I've been an acquisitions editor. I've been a marketing director. So I've inhabited many roles within the industry, so I can speak on a lot of different issues. Bit of a Renaissance man in terms of publishing. Academically speaking, I do have an MA in English Studies, so I have been on the other side of the table as well. I've been a student, I've been a postgrad, and in my role, I currently attend a lot of conferences, although currently that would be a bit of an oxymoron. They're mostly virtual, but we are starting to attend physical conferences again. But I spend a lot of time giving workshops and working with people virtually in the way that we're doing today. I often discuss publishing opportunities with prospective authors. So please feel free to email me after the session, and we can arrange a call, or we can converse via email to discuss any publishing related queries you might have that we don't get through today. You can also reach me at james@intellectbooks.com. I'll put that in the chat before the end of the session. So feel free to email me, as I say, and if you want to maybe present a proposal or an idea, more than happy to be the first port of call to look through that, offer you some advice and guidance, and try and expedite that process for you. So before I get onto the session properly, I just would like to introduce Intellect a little bit, especially for those of you who might not be aware of us or what we're up to. So we remain an independent publisher of international scholarly books and journals. We've been a commercial publisher for 35, 36, 38 years now. And Intellect's focus is predominantly on research, often cutting edge research, particularly across the arts and humanities, and to some degree within the social sciences. But you won't see us publishing anything on biology, on pandemics, or anything of that nature. We know what we're good at, and we stick to it. We also own Hammer-On Press, who are now an imprint of Intellect. They focus on activism more specifically, again, predominantly within the arts and humanities, but they're coming to the fore, especially with what's going on in society and the zeitgeist at the moment. As mentioned, we are an independent company, but we have a partnership with the University of Chicago Press. So that's pretty important for us, and it allows us to work with the university press as well as being, agile, independent, small. It gives us the best of both worlds. Just something else to highlight here, which we're going to get into as well. All of our content, or at least all of our academic content, is 100% peer reviewed, and mostly double-blind peer reviewed. And we can get into that as we proceed through this presentation. We currently publish 108 different peer-reviewed journals, so they come out between 2 and 6 times a year. Kind of academic magazines, effectively, for anyone who hasn't read many journals in the past. We also publish about 100 books a year, and most of these books, as I say, are academic, mainly monographs. We publish handbooks as well, and edited anthologies that relate to specific subjects. But we are open to all ideas, but we tend to steer away from things like textbooks, for example. Okay, to jump into the presentation, So as I've mentioned, I attend a lot of conferences, and when I attend conferences, a question I often get, especially from students and early career researchers, is when should I start publishing? And my answer is always firmly the same: now. Don't wait. So there's a lot of myths and misinformation that circulates around publishing and the processes. For example, I need a PhD before I can publish in a journal. And most of these myths are often like not true, or they're antiquated. They're things that may have been true back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, but not anymore. Publishing is a rapidly moving industry, and it's important you stay abreast of developments. And one of the best ways you can do that is certainly to attend things like conferences and speak to people like myself. But you should definitely be open to developing your writing as early as possible, whether that be as an undergraduate student, as a postgraduate, or as an early career researcher. It's become very important for you to publish, and not publish or perish, but to definitely sort of start trying to take that research or those essays or those papers that you're delivering at conferences to that next level and get them published as a research output within a journal, maybe a book chapter, or potentially as your own monograph. And you should be thinking about that and ways to make that possible and feasible as early as possible within your career, if you're looking to become a permanent academic or a researcher or something of that nature. So excuse me for a second, the computer is just jamming a bit here. Okay, so I wanted to just kick off really with some top tips about the first steps and maybe some potential opportunities. But before we begin down that road, I just wanted to acknowledge a few realities that we face at the end of 2021. And these are realities that we will face still in 2022. So it's been a difficult few years for publishers. I mean, it's been a difficult decade, and the pandemic, changes in technology, lack of funding, the Trump regime, there's many reasons, but it has been a difficult time for our business models and for us as an industry. And of course, it has been across the whole of academia. So of course, academic publishing within the arts and humanities has been particularly affected. But, it's not all doom and gloom. But, I think we should, acknowledge a few of these issues. For example, there's not much paper anymore in the world. So publishing printed books is becoming difficult. But in alignment with that, the pandemic and everyone working at home led to libraries buying digital only. So physical books, especially hardback, expensive library books, they don't really exist in the same way that they once did. Many publishers now increasingly devoting more and more time and resources into developing digital platforms where they can present content, not books, not chapters, not journals, just content to whomever needs it in whatever format that might be. Intellect is certainly been at the forefront of that, but you can see the same going on with Macmillan, with Bloomsbury, with Routledge, with Oxford University Press, with you name them, especially out of the major university presses and larger commercial enterprises. They're going to be developing a lot of digital content. So that is going to affect the publishing landscape, but also potentially it offers a lot of opportunities for the ways in which you can develop your own content and publish your own research. So we can get into that in a bit more detail, but that's something. It's a silver lining that comes out of a potentially devastating reality. So print library sales are down, but as an industry, sales have held up because of digital, especially in books, where books have definitely suffered in a traditional sense. But we also see book shops and a resurgence in independent retailers, for example, mom and pop one-off retailers, but also smaller foils and bookshops of that nature. But even the big dogs, the Barnes and Nobles and everything, they also still are seeing a resurgence in print book sales. So people were saying this is the final death knell in publishing and in academic research outputs in a traditional sense, but that's not the case. In fact, this has opened up new business models, new opportunities, and new directions, within publishing. But we're still negotiating that landscape, and you as potential authors need to just be aware that this is a changing landscape, a changing market, a changing industry, and that very much will affect how, what, and when things will be published. Okay. Anyway, so I will jump forward, and we can talk about that again as well. But I want to talk a little bit about choosing a publisher or a publication, if it would be maybe a journal. In light of what I've just said, choosing the right publisher is perhaps more important than ever. And there's been a lot of mergers, acquisitions, and things taking place. So it is a moving landscape. The first question for many people when considering who they're going to publish it with is, should I publish with a university press or a commercial press? And we can ultimately boil down all publishers, especially in the academic community, into those two kind of like silos. So would your project be better suited to a commercial publisher or a university press? And fundamentally, what's the difference between them? Potentially not that much these days, which is kind of interesting. A lot of people in the past were pushed to publish with university presses or were blinded by these big brand names, but they have changed. They no longer have, not all of them anyway, have the same level of funding from their respective university host. Some don't have any funding anymore and are completely commercial, even though that they are still under a university press moniker. University presses can also be very slow. So if your research is timely or you need to get it out for, I don't know, for career reasons or whatever it might be, a university press has often more levels and hurdles in place. So it can take a matter of, it can take several years rather than, several months. So they can be slow. They often have large editorial boards, which are made up of, administrative staff, deans, scholars, as well as university press representatives. Whereas a commercial business, is generally smaller, more agile, can be more direct in those instances. Of course, university presses can still be far more prestigious if it's a Duke or it's an Oxford or it's an MIT. But there needs to be the right press and the right press for your particular research or your particular project. Otherwise, you're just going to miss out on that. And if MIT is starting a new line in, I don't know, ballet, that's fine, but they're not known for it. So maybe that prestige is slightly, be underrepresented there. You'd be better off publishing with a commercial business who are focused on working with ballet for decades. So it's a trade-off, but one that you should be aware of. But they're not the same as they once were, so it's worth just considering your options. But of course, another thing just to be aware of is the first thing you should probably do is go to your respective department or to the Dean of Research or to some administrative staff and ask whether they have a list of preferred publishers or a list of preferred publications in terms of journals. And make sure you're not just barking up the wrong tree, as it were. Make sure that you are submitting your ideas, your research, engaging in conversations with publishers who are going to count, whether it be towards your research excellence framework, your publishing outputs, or towards tenure and your career development. So some institutions and some regions still really push university presses, whereas others cannot. But it's important, I think, that you are aware of that and that you open those questions and conversations with people within the department, within the team, before you start engaging with publishers or before you choose what type of publisher you want to engage with. So to continue, before approaching a publisher, research the options available. And I don't want to sound patronizing, but many people miss these really obvious first stages, or they get a little bit too excited perhaps and bypass these bits. And again, some of this will sound obvious, but people miss it, so I'm going to highlight it. Before choosing a publisher, you need to do all this research, and some of the good ways to do that would be to look at websites in depth. Publishers' websites used to be a joke, but now they contain a wealth and depth of information and material that can be very helpful to you, not only in choosing whether they're the right publisher for you, but also in terms of like, here's a step-by-step guide of how to submit a proposal to this publisher or to an arts and humanities publisher in general. So look on the websites and try and get as much information and as many, kind of like, I don't know, like you can download all these PDFs on how to submit and style guides and all these different things. So look for all the material out there that can help you make an informed decision. But also when you're looking at websites, be looking at catalogs. Look at the forthcoming catalog. What are they publishing? Who's publishing what? Who's moving into what areas? And how does that relate to the areas that you are interested in or you work in? Start looking for trends. Maybe you can, not change your research, but slightly manipulate it so that it feels more in line with some of the trends that are taking place, so that you can make something more acceptable to a publisher, even though it may be fairly niche and maybe not within their traditional remit. As well as looking at catalogs and backlists, websites, trends and what's coming out, it's also good to look at book series if we're talking about books. A lot of publishers now publish books within a series, and they feel that they can leverage sales from collective projects within one book series, across different disciplines. Intellect have many book series, about 50, and then all of our competitors will also have many different book series. And there's also, like, for example, I have a book series on hip hop music and culture. The University of California Press, a very different publisher, traditional university press, they also have a book series on hip hop. But your books might fit more into the way Intellect works, or into the themes that we're interested in more than UC, and conversely, maybe it's the other way around. So it's definitely worth looking who's publishing what. Are there any series that your book that you were originally pitching as a monograph, maybe you can develop it so that it fits in alignment with the aims and scope of a specific series. There's already a market for it. They need more content. So looking at those series is a good thing to do as well when you're looking for options and publishers. When looking at a publisher, another thing to consider, the publisher you choose, do they accept developed dissertations? Perhaps your project is your master's or your undergraduate or your thesis, and you're developing it from a thesis into a publishable monograph. But some publishers will just not be interested from the get-go. Others, like Intellect, I know McFarlane's been involved today. Publishers like us, who, although we're very different, we will both accept and work with you on developing a dissertation. So, as a 101, it's important to know whether the publisher will accept that kind of content. And there's no point pretending it wasn't a dissertation, because they will sniff you out. But bear that in mind. That's an early question that you should be asking yourself. And similarly, is this an anthology? Will they publish that? I mean, is it a picture book? Is it a coffee table book? Will they publish that? Or are they only interested in more instructional materials, handbooks, textbooks, readers? Or do they just publish monographs and edited collections? Maybe they won't do anything with color imagery. Maybe they won't even print anything. Maybe it's all online. So, these are questions that you need to keep in mind when picking a publisher. A great resource is your published colleagues and your, dissertation supervisors, things like that. Every publisher's got their good points. Everyone's got their bad too. Some are draconian and you don't want to work with them if you're, creatively minded. Some people really need that rigor and linear trajectory in terms of how things operate. So ask your colleagues, what were the shortcomings? What were the positives? Did they give you a lot of assistance, or were you told to go and design your own cover? Were the financial issues, whatever it might be? But ask around, ask your colleagues, and then again attend conferences and speak with editors such as myself. Look at book tables, because at conferences, and physically now there are going to be a lot more hybrid conferences where there will be exhibition stalls, stands, publishers and editors like myself available to speak with. So attend conferences, deliver papers, and then go and speak with editors about whether they'd be interested in developing that paper into a publishable article for a journal, or if it's part of a thesis or a dissertation, maybe they'd be interested in developing that into a monograph or a chapter within a book, a handbook, or something for one of their online platforms. As I say, digital content is now king. So, definitely attend conferences and try to utilize all these options that are available to you. It's also a great way to test your research. If you deliver a paper, you're going to get great peer feedback from colleagues and from other people working in the area, as well as potential journal editors, and then of course subject area editors, acquisitions editors such as myself. So that's definitely a good thing to do. You can also contact a specific editor at a specific press. So once you've ascertained whether a certain press is interested in the type of work you're producing, go on the website, find out who the editors are, who works in your area, try and get a colleague or someone to introduce you. If not, reach out directly and arrange a Zoom, a phone call, and start spitballing and sharing information and discussing your project, and just see whether they're likely to be interested in it. And if they're not, they'll probably say, yeah, but look, let me introduce you to John, whoever at Bloomsbury, they're more likely to be interested in this specific project. So there's a lot of things at your advantage there if you engage in these conversations. Okay, what else do I want to say here? Yeah, it's also quite useful before you develop a full proposal, which we'll discuss in a minute. It's quite good to have like a one sheet, almost like a one-page CV, but a one-pager that exemplifies what the project is. Even if it's an article, if it's a book, if it's a chapter, it doesn't matter. If you've got a one-pager, which is like, here's the methodology, the aims, the scope, here's some of the the literature I've engaged with. I need this many images. This is the audience. These are my key sales points. Just a very short, sweet thing that you can pass hand to someone like myself at a conference, who maybe we don't have time for a full meeting, or I certainly don't want to read the full manuscript in this early stage. But one sheet with an outline of what you're doing, that's very much of interest to me. So having a one sheet in your back pocket is very important, I think. But then in addition to that, it's also very good to have an elevator pitch, a few sentences which you can just reel off at a book stand, or literally in an elevator, at the bar, at the coffee shop, whatever it is, to get my interest, so that I want to have a follow-up meeting and want to read your full proposal. So do yourself a favor and have a one sheet and an elevator pitch prepared for your ideas and for your project. Another thing which can't be, I guess, highlighted enough or emphasized enough is to ensure that the press, the publisher, or the journal is reputable. There are more publishers and journals than ever before, but that doesn't mean that they're all good. They certainly are not. There's a lot of what we call vanity or predatory publishers out there. This is even more problematic in light of the pandemic, because it's become more difficult to ascertain whether a publisher is bona fide or not. I will give you some checks momentarily, but you need to make sure that you're not. If say a publisher emails you and says, "Yo, I'd really like you to submit this to this journal," you need to ensure that that publisher is bona fide, is a real publisher. And these days, not just a bot, an algorithm. And what we're seeing is a lot of, predatory publishers stealing people's research, or getting them to sign things that they shouldn't, or tying up quality research in a, want of a better term, a Mickey Mouse publication, and therefore you're not going to receive the right kudos, and you're not going to receive the career development, or you're not going to be globally recognized for the work you've done. So it's really important to ensure that the press or the publication that you choose is reputable. And I will now give you a few tips to ensure that this is what you're doing. Let me just bringing up another little sheet here. Okay. So to ensure the press or the publication is legit, the first thing I would do is check that they have a robust peer review process. So what do they review? How do they review it? Who's reviewing it? And when in the process are they reviewing it? Peer review should be mandatory. If you're working in academic disciplines, it needs to be peer reviewed. And by peer reviewed, I mean one isn't enough. 2, 3, 4 readers who are also academics within the field, anonymously reading your work. They don't know who you are. You don't know who they are. And then they're giving you genuine, objective feedback. Yes, it has its shortcomings, but it's the best system that we have at the moment for ensuring that we don't have too much editorial control as a publisher, and that we ensure that that everything is above board and to the highest quality academically and scholarly and research speaking. So ensuring that the company has a robust peer review process is important. Happy to answer questions on what that entails, but also you should be clear about what that means. And that when you engage with a journal or an editor or a publisher, ask them how they're going to review the work. And if you feel that feels a bit soft, it probably is, and you should be looking to work with a more rigorous publisher. Just because they'll publish it doesn't mean that that's worth your while. It's hard to take knockdowns and knockbacks, but it's better to publish with someone or in a publication that's legit, that you're going to receive royalties from and you're going to receive kudos from, and you're gonna have citations and all these things for the rest of your career, rather than, you know, you miss your opportunity with your magnum opus. Anyway, I digress. Some other checks: they need to be international. The publisher needs to be international. That means they need to publish international work from across the globe, and they also need to be available. The content needs to be available digitally and in print globally. So international. They need to be recognized. They need to have international distribution. You know, content needs to be available. And then you want to see, film studies from Asia, film studies from Australasia, film studies from South America. You don't want to just be Anglo-centric, for example. So that's quite important. In addition to being international and having a robust peer review process, will they actually print anything? Because, you know, some of these slightly illegitimate publishers, they won't print anything at all, or it will be, you know, Xerox copy, print on demand, lowest possible, or through Amazon CreateSpace. So potentially no one will ever read your real book. And if that's important to you, or if it's important to your institution, so that they distinguish this publisher as a legit enterprise because they're printing books still, then that's something that's important for you to check. Always check who's published with them previously. Do you recognize colleagues, names, people who you read and cite? You know, I would be looking for that if I was going to work with a publisher within my field. And then similarly, are any of their publications listed on citation indexes? If it's journals, are they ranked? Hello?
Turn
on.
Hello? Oh, there we go, no problem. I thought someone was asking a question in a different language then for a second.
Oh yeah, we just logged in. Sorry, I had it unmuted. You guys go ahead and carry on.
Oh, you're good. Where was it again? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so looking at rankings can be important, especially with journals, and just if they're, the thing is, with say like a ranking site, like a, you know, the Web of Science or Scopus, for example, you might not be familiar with these things. Again, happy to discuss them in greater detail in a second. I'll open up to questions in a minute. You know, if to be accepted by, you know, the Web of Science, to be given an impact factor if it's appropriate, or to be on Scopus and other indexes, it means the work has to be consistent, has to be peer reviewed, it has to be international. So by checking some of these ranking sites, indexes and other things, which your universities and libraries will be connected to, which would be worth, you know, speaking again to people at the library who will know more about this, you know, then you know it's going to be reputable and bona fide, for example. But of course, you know, fundamentally as well, what's important for your particular project? Focus on the right home for your particular article, essay, book, whatever the project entails. You know, don't approach Verso or Routledge because you've heard of them. Do your due diligence and research and find out who's going to be best for your project, and your best for your project right now in this rapidly developing, changing, technically dynamic marketplace and industry that publishing has become. You know, it's been shaken into the 21st century, and the pandemic has pushed that to the next level. So it's an exciting time to be approaching publishers, but you know, we're still trying to catch up with the times in a sense. For example, it might take some publishers many years to get your publication to market. Some very prestigious publishers will take 5 years from when you submit the manuscript to get it out into the real world. Your stuff may be, you know, passé, out of date by then. So you need to work with someone who can get it in front of people in a timely fashion, if that's important. Again, if you need a lot of imagery, you may need to submit to a press or a publication with high production values who's used to making coffee table books or working with lithographic printers, top designers, and have all these skills in-house, for example. You know, will you be seeking tenure from this project? Ensure you submit to a publisher who is tenure track, who is verified, that has sufficient controls in place to be deemed a quality press by your institution. Cycling back to my earlier point, make sure you check with your department before engaging in conversation with a publisher that they will accept. You know, if you publish with them, they'll honor it. You know, you'll get your credits for it or whatever it might be. Often they'll have a list of preferred presses, journal publications. So that should be early on your list of actions. I'm going to start talking about a contract in a minute and then proposals. So this might be a nice time if anyone has any questions just upon what I've already been mentioning. I can see a few things have come into the chat there. I'm just going to have a quick look and see if anything is particularly burning, and if not, we can come to it at the end. But this all making sense to everyone, and if anyone has any specifics, do just drop them in. Okay, sure. Lashini, I will comment on that later. Can always speak to you directly about that. But yeah, there's lots of specific publishers, and also specific journals. So it's very important to make sure you do your due diligence and research the right places, especially if your research is slightly niche, which it sounds like yours is. But we can come back to that. Any questions about choosing the right publisher just before I move on to looking at contracts and then proposals? I can also answer questions at the end, so do just drop them in the chat function, but I will crack on for now. So contracts, book publishing contracts used to be very simple, but they've got somewhat more complicated, and there's a few objective dangers there underlying now. But yeah, so if you've chosen the right publisher and you've been offered a contract, based upon your proposal or on your initial conversations, congratulations. But there's a few things I'd like you to be aware of before you sign. And first of all, be very careful what you sign. And if you've got a friend who's a lawyer, get them to have a look. But there's a few things just to highlight that have become normal practice in publishing contracts, which, can catch you out. So just some things, I'll just reel these off, but some things to be aware of. So the royalty, i.e. what money you will be paid based upon the sales, what rate will that be? Will it be 0%? Will it be 3%? Will it be 8%? Will it be 12%? These are kind of standard rates. But also, will you get paid nothing until the company breaks even, recoups their investment, and then you get your 3%, your 5%, your 8%, your 12%? Do you get an advance? So what are you going to get paid, when, and and how much? Is it going to be on the net, on the gross? Is it going to be after the company has sold a certain number of copies, or after they've recouped? Or will you get 12% flat on everything sold before any costs have come out? So knowing what you're going to get paid on what is really important, because there's a few ways that you can get tricked there. So being very clear about what that entails is important. Will you receive any author copies? This was stipulated in the contract. A lot of publishers now won't even give you a copy of your own book. That's a truth, unfortunately. But will you receive any? Will you get 1? Will you get 10? Will you get 50? Will you get a discount? Will you be able to order any book from that company with a 50% discount? Will you be able to order as many copies of your own book as you want with a 50% discount? Will they let you resell your own book independently, directly? These are all questions, but things that will be addressed within the contract. Something that you see in contracts a lot these days is this idea of an embargo or an embargo period. A lot of this is in light of open access and other factors affecting publishing, but many publishers will have an embargo period on your work, which will be built into the contract. You need to check this, you need to know what that means. So basically they might say you cannot reproduce, republish any of the work within this book, this article, this chapter for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. That's the embargo period. You need to know if that's the case, how long and why. Like I say, a lot of it's to do with open access, and it can be a really good thing and allow us to publish more niche projects, more sort of more niche and more specialized projects, because we can ensure that we can get open access funding for them and things of that nature. But also a lot of journals now, they will want they will not let you reproduce any of the content from the article you've submitted for maybe a year. And then if you get a book contract and the main part of the thesis is what you've published in that journal article, if that's like a 1 year embargo, that's probably fine. But if that's 3 years, maybe that book contract all of a sudden is not going to be valid, because they want that in market within a year or 2 years. So understanding embargoes is important, and it's something that we'll often see stipulated within contracts these days, as things are moving and rapidly shifting. So check that out. So yeah, basically, can you repurpose or republish any sections in another project? So that's important to be aware of. Going back to that idea of peer review, which I really want to hammer home today because it's really important. The peer review process should probably be stipulated in the contract, whether it's going to be double blind, and it will say something like, we will only 100% commit to this project after positive peer review or after the peer review process has been undertaken. So there will probably be reference to peer review. Can you get out of the contract if you or if the other party, i.e. the publisher, can't fulfill the terms? So that's important as well. Can you get out of the thing? If you're working in visual, mediums, or if your work's very much like design communication, fashion design, whatever, photography, image rights, who's responsible? Normally it's the author, but it will stipulate in the contract whether that's your responsibility or whether the publisher or the journal will assist. And then the other thing is you want to make sure that within the contract it stipulates whether you can have images, whether they'll be reproduced in color or black and white, whether it will be printed full color throughout, or whether they will publish and print certain sections in color. Again, if you're doing a book on fashion design in the 1960s or something, you may want loads of cool, vivid color images. Make sure that that is stipulated in the contract, because otherwise, if the company has some difficulties financially, or if they feel they can shortchange you and save some money, they may well say, now these are fine in black and white, but that might irreparably change the book or the project. So making sure that you know what you're getting in terms of printing, distribution, color, quality, design, all that kind of stuff is really important, and it should be in the contract. Something else, the number of copies to be printed, if it's going to be printed at all, will probably be stipulated, or a minimum number, and that's something you might want to pursue. Otherwise, they will have the capacity to not print it, so there'll be no books on bookshelves. There'll only be print on demand or digital only versions. And again, if it's very imagistic and aesthetic and designerly, you probably want it to be printed lithographically on a traditional printing press rather than it being print on demand and poorly bound. Although many companies now, like Lightning Source, have a far more sophisticated printing process for print on demand digital printing than we've experienced in the past. So it might not matter. It certainly doesn't for text-based projects, and we're starting to use print on demand much more, and it's allowing us to facilitate orders in different markets at a lot lower price, which means we can lower the cost to the consumer, so we can hopefully sell more copies and get you read more. So there's a lot of silver linings, there's a lot of nuance, but again, something to be aware of. And then of course, as I've mentioned, digital rights and terms. Who's responsible? And if the publisher sells the digital rights for the work to be hosted on a different platform, do you get paid from that? Or are you only getting paid your royalty based on printed books? Are you getting any royalty on the ebook? Are you getting any royalty on any digital rights? And again, similarly, what if they sell the rights to a foreign publisher who then publishes the book in Farsi, in Hindi, in Swedish? Do you get any rights? Do you have any say? Do you get paid? These are all questions that you need to be in mind, and that will all be in the contract. Subvention and fees. Increasingly, many publishers look for fees and subvention from grants from individuals, such as yourself as an author, or from a university, an association, something of that nature. Again, it'll be stipulated in the contract, and you should be aware of whether you're responsible for getting any of this. And also, if they do want a subvention and you provide $3,000, paid for by your institution, by a grant, or by your mum and dad, or whatever it might be, what are they using that for? Are they using it to line their coffers, or are they using it to reduce the RRP and to pay for digital images or for a fancy cover? So if you're providing any financial support for a publishing company, or you're paying, what are you paying for? Are you paying for open access? Are you paying for more marketing, for reduced costs? You need to know what that's about. And again, just keep an eye out for that in the contract. And then again, open access is increasingly important. So if you have any interest in it, you need to find out what it all entails and whether that's going to affect your book or your project, whatever it might be. And also find out, can they make it open access in the future without, asking you, which can be really beneficial because you're probably going to get a lot more citations. And of course, democratically, it broadens access to knowledge. But again, you might not get paid, etc., etc. So it's just good to keep some of these things in mind. And these are some of the things that you'll find are now, you're seeing in contracts that we didn't used to see in the past. So there's a little bit about contracting. Also bear in mind distributor. For example, Intellect's an independent publisher, but we're partnered with the University of Chicago Press. So not only do we work with the University Press in terms of editorial, we have them in our back burner. They do a lot of marketing, sales, and of course distribution, which would include things like sales reps who will go into bookshops and libraries and try and sell the book to the right audience in the right market. So does your publisher have a robust international distribution agreement with a major player? Do they have a marketing force, a sales team? Can they target the right reader? Can they target the appropriate audience? This is an important question you need to ask yourself before signing a contract with a specific press. Okay, so that's kind of that. And I wanted to move on now to talk a little bit about developing a proposal that would be tailored to your chosen publisher. I'm just going to check there's no questions come in. Okay. Any questions at this point? I know I'm kind of like reeling off a lot of information. I'm just trying to cover a lot of bases in the time that we have, and then we can speak specifics, and of course you can always reach out to me afterwards. I understand there's a lot to take in here, and of course I don't know 100% who I'm dealing with in terms of your level of experience. So apologies if some of this is patronizing, but also apologies if some of this is pitched over your head. I'm trying to give a bit of a 101. So please bear with me. Okay, so in terms of developing a proposal, there's a few things I wanted to highlight. So first and foremost, you really want to think of the proposal as a job application. So be very thorough and don't just send it off willy-nilly. I always like to say to someone, when you've finished it, put it in a drawer, leave it for the weekend, come back a few days later, reread it, proof it again, and just make sure that you haven't focused on superfluous things, or that you've not got too caught up in the proposal rather than the actual project itself. So it's fine for you to submit multiple proposals to multiple publishers simultaneously, which is fine. So you can submit the same proposal to me and the same proposal to Bloomsbury. I would strongly advocate that you make sure that you're following the guidelines by both press and submitting the right proposals to the right press. Here's a little anecdote for you. I once received a very good proposal, but unfortunately they submitted it to me on a Bloomsbury author questionnaire, which doesn't lead me to believe that I was your first choice, nor necessarily that you have that that eye for catching mistakes or whatever it is that you've said in the proposal. If you've sent me a proposal on someone else's form. So yep, that's about right. So yeah, eek. So watch out for that. So make sure that you do your due diligence. You've done all that research. You pick the right publisher, and then you follow their guidelines to the T, and you submit the right proposal form, etc. But you can submit to multiple publishers at the same time, and it's good because you can create a bidding war. You can create, you can expedite the process. You can get things fast tracked, and it does work. But you should inform each press who you're working with, who you've been in discussion with, and you'll find that, say, on my author questionnaire, our proposal process, it does ask whether the work is under any further consideration by the publishers. So that's quite important. To go back to editors, people such as myself, speak to the right editors at the press, find out what they require before submitting that proposal. Some people will send me a full manuscript with a letter, and a letter of endearment from their great granddad and all the rest of it. And you're like, I don't need any of this. I do need you to fill this author questionnaire in. So it's best to just, check in, get a person, get a human that you can then interact with, And rather than sending it off to, acquisitions at Intellect, try and send it to James or to whoever's, who you've ascertained or who you've got an introduction from a colleague to. So try and find the right editor and get as much information as you can. And in alignment with that, read all the available literature. Like I said, our websites used to be a wasteland, but now they're pretty good. There's FAQs, there's guidelines. Most publishers will have detailed information on their websites. Read their style guide and follow everything diligently. It sounds obvious, but the amount of spelling mistakes that I see, the amount of just schoolboy, schoolgirl issues and mistakes and stuff, it puts you to the back of the queue. So it really is important to highlight some of these obvious things, like filling in the right form, etc., etc. Many proposals won't want a full manuscript now. We would often want to see maybe a sample chapter and a table of contents, and then a very detailed author questionnaire. And of course, it's not just about your methodology, your aims, your scope, the content of the book. It's now just as much about who's the audience, how do we reach them, what's the competition. These marketing and sales questions become a really important part of the proposal process. You're often the expert on a specialist niche area. We really need to get as much information out of you as possible, which is why at Intellect we utilize an author questionnaire and a question answer proposal process, which means that we can garner and griffin all the information that we need. But don't be surprised if you're asked a lot of marketing questions and I don't know anything about marketing isn't the appropriate response. The appropriate response is to have a little think and be like, oh, actually, yes, I have read all the literature. I do know the competition. And again, with competition, don't go down that route of being, this is completely unique. There's no competition out there. Because all that means is that we're going to go and do our due diligence. We're going to find 10 books that are directly in competition, and then we're going to question, well, do you know the field, or are you trying to hide a bunch of stuff from us? It's much better to be realistic when you submit, the proposal, and then of course the manuscript as well. If you say that this is a trade book, then we expect one. We don't expect an academic book that you think is going to have a wide trade appeal, because they rarely do, unfortunately. There's nothing worse for an academic editor, like an acquisitions editor, to hear than this book has crossover appeal, because what that means to us is it's very difficult to market, to sell. We have to reduce the costs. We have to increase our costs, but reduce the cost to the reader, to the consumer, and we have to pay the bookshops to have it in place. So whilst we love trade books or books that do cross over, what many people perceive to be crossover titles really are not. They're actually academic books that are on a slightly sexier subject. But fundamentally, you're still looking at a very much practice-led, fan-led, academic scholarly readership, which is going to be finite. So being realistic about what the project is and how you present it to us, bearing in mind what you're ultimately going to deliver, is very, very important. So don't be misleading in that sense, and do highlight competing titles. Don't pretend it's unique. These are good top tips, trust. So who is the audience? Be very clear. This subject, students, researchers, teachers, whatever it might be, actual ballerinas, if we're talking about ballet, for example. Academic publishing, like the academic world in general, is going through somewhat of a shake-up and a financial crisis, so be mindful of this. So know the market, provide market research and a marketing plan, or at least show you have thought about the market and thought about the competition and the audience. These things are all going to be very important whether you get a contract these days. It's also good to think about length when you're doing the proposal. Again, be realistic. If we offer you a contract for a 90,000 word monograph and you submit 130,000 words, you're going to have the best 40,000 superfluous words of all time. Otherwise, we're going to make you edit them all out. So don't think you can get around that. I'm thinking back to me being an undergraduate student and it being like a 2,000 word essay. You're allowed 10%, but 10% is really like 16%, right? So you're trying to sneak in as many extra words as you can, or you throw it all down there in the end notes or the footnotes or whatever. you can't be doing that. You've got to be just the margins to 2 inches exactly, Jeanette. Yeah, I see. You know the score. Single line space, right, or 1.5. But yeah, be realistic and be aware that most publishers are going to look at a book that's over 100,000 words, and they're going to be like, damn, that means we've got to increase our costs quite dramatically, including things like we have to use a different kind of binding, we have to do this, that, and the other. It's going to cost more to sell, blah blah blah. But yeah, it's problematic. So be very realistic about what you're going to write, and then stick to what you've been told. The same with the writing plan. If you say that you're going to deliver the book in a year, if you genuinely think it's probably going to be more like a year and a half, just say that. And the only time it becomes a problem to us really is when we've gone through peer review and we're presenting the book to the market, and the data feeds are out there through our distributors and all those kinds of things. When there's delays at that point, then it becomes detrimental to the book's success. But in terms of the writing of it, unless it's really timely, you can often take longer than you think. We can speed things up on our end. But it's annoying when someone says they're going to submit something in September 21 and then September 23 comes around and they're still asking for another extension. It's fine, but it's just like, why didn't you say this was a 5-year project? So being realistic is something I want you to take away from this when it comes to submitting a proposal. And again, in terms of in terms of the financing of a project, if you can get any funding from an institution, it's great to come to the table with that, especially if you want to have a full color, coffee table style book about a very niche subject. If we're looking at, we need to sell 800 copies to break even, and we're realistically thinking we can do 500, something's got to give. And it's either the amount of color imagery that we can produce, or you can come to the table with like some funding from an institution. So, we're open to that. It should never be a prerequisite for publication. By that, I mean to say is, if a publisher comes to you and says, if you give us this money, we'll publish this, they are not a legitimate publisher, and you do not want to be working with them unless you want to go down that route of vanity press publishing. But at the same token, MIT and Duke and Yale will ask for subvention. Intellect will ask for subvention. There's nothing wrong with it, as long as the publisher is open and clear and transparent about what they're going to use it for and why. And often it's to produce coffee table books when we would be producing a black and white monograph, that kind of thing. And in actuality, Intellect subsidizes a lot of our book program via the profits from our journal program. So we're often, in debt, through some of these books. So it's difficult. They're difficult to break even, let alone make money out of. So bear that in mind. And if you can bring some funding, then that can be really advantageous in terms of the end result of how the book will turn out. But yeah, and just be aware, again, if you're going to have a full color book, it's going to cost 3 times the amount. That kind of, that's what we're looking at here. So you've got to be aware of that. Okay, yeah. Feel free to shop the proposal around, but do that with some etiquette and class and finesse as well. If the book was originally a dissertation, and we are more than happy to publish dissertations, but we will develop them with you. We won't just publish a dissertation, because a dissertation is very different to a publishable monograph. We often publish what was originally a dissertation, though, because especially in the areas that we work in, specialist, cutting edge, multidisciplinary research within the arts and humanities, people's dissertations are often really cool and interesting. But they are dissertations. They need a lot of work, a lot of development, a lot of editing, and a lot of editorial finesse. So if you are submitting a dissertation, make sure, like I said earlier, that the publisher's interested in dissertations, but then be aware that you're going to have to do some work, and publishers can be skeptical. So allay their concerns within the proposal. So a couple of things just to highlight them. The objective is not to convince your supervisors that you can present a high level of research, that high level required to be awarded a PhD, but rather it's to deliver a coherent and exciting book that is easy to read and persuasive, that will attract a marketable and relevant audience. So, it's difficult. Couple of tips. First of all, there's a really good book which you should read. It's called From Dissertation to Book. It's published by the University of Chicago Press. I mean, it's just a book. There's I know I'm kind of work with them, but it is a really good book, and it's by a guy called Germano. So From Dissertation to Book by Germano. Highly recommend that. Plus, there is a huge, inordinate amount of material, not only on publishers' websites, but just out there in the ether now. Obviously you're all researchers, so you know what you're looking at, if it's primary or BS, So make sure that you just do as much reading around the subject as possible, and you can, before you get to an editor or to a proposal, you can have already half developed this thing anyway. In addition to all the materials out there which will help you, rewrite, redraft, or turn your dissertation into a book, what we're seeing a lot of now, and if you can do this, write the dissertation as a book to begin with. Many supervisors and schools are allowing people to do this because they really want them to publish a book rather than, create a dissertation. So they're letting them either write 2 versions simultaneously, or they're just letting them write it as a monograph. So they're getting rid of some of the large, like the literary review. That's just a small part of an introduction in a monograph, whereas in a dissertation or a thesis, it could be a huge part. The flagging, I am going to do this because, that stuff's all out the window too. Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, it's in the chat there, guys. So yeah, definitely have a look. Have a look at that. It's a good one. But there's a lot of other books out there now as well. Yeah, so instead of that methodology section, a literary review, most of that stuff can be omitted. Instead, you need a short, succinct, strong introduction and conclusion. And again, the tone will need to be changed. Don't be boring. Dissertations are often boring. You're going to need to write dynamically. You're going to assume that the reader knows a lot more than you have to flag in a dissertation. But I'm gleaning over some complicated issues here, but they're things that we can discuss later or at a different time. If a book can be assigned as a text at undergraduate level, this will be very attractive. So can colleagues, can course leaders, can they provide testimonials? Can anyone in the library say, oh yeah, we'd definitely purchase this, or we'd have this in our digital platform? So again, going back to showing knowledge of the market, what classes are being taught in the area, who's the key players in the area, can you get any of them to act as ambassadors on your behalf to write you like a testimonial or whatever. Going back to length and pagination, especially with dissertations, they're often over 100,000 words, and you're going to need to edit significantly to make it an attractive monograph for the reasons I've outlined. Like, there's a lot of superfluous content there, and it can be cut dramatically. If any of it has been published in journals before, some people shy away from this, but I would say try and get as much published in journals as you can, and then come to the publisher with your book proposal and say, look at these citations and other prestige factors, like if it's a really good journal and it's got high citations, you want to flag that, highlight that. It's been used by this government body, select committee, C-SPAN, whatever it is. So use the fact that you've published sections of it elsewhere, or that you won an award for your dissertation or for a paper delivered at a conference. Highlight those prestige factors. It will definitely make it much more attractive. Okay, right. So that's a lot, but that's kind of all I wanted to speak about on books. Now I know I've come to the end of my hour, so it might be good just to open up to some questions, and then if anyone wants to know anything specifically about journals, I can speak on that. Jeanette, I don't know how much time I've got. I've got time to take questions. I'm in no rush, but I don't know if you've got to run off to another session.
Oh no, you're totally fine. The next session is at 2:15, I think. So we've got some time.
Okay, great. Well, look, would anyone like to ask anything based upon what I've said before I start jumping into journals? It might be better just to focus on what we've discussed. But if anyone has any specific journal questions, hit me now. I'm happy for people to raise their hands and speak, or we can do it in the chat, as you prefer. But if anyone has a question, let's open the floodgates. Or not.
Well, I know we had a question in there. Somebody asked if you had any experience with self-publishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, self-publishing. Yeah, so that's becoming, well, it was very common. It's less common again now. Do you have experience of self-publishing? If so, do you have any advice? I apologize. Okay, so I just reading this. No, I didn't cover it because I'm quite skeptical. Self-publishing, there's lots of positives. Obviously, there's no one going to affect your editorial control. You can say what you want, freedom of speech. Potentially, it can be read by a really big audience, etc. There's no costs to you, probably, but fundamentally, conversely, all the other things apply. It hasn't gone through an extremely rigorous vetting procedure with the full weight of the publishing industry and its millennia of history and all the rest of it comes with it. So I mean, I would say self-publishing is great if you're doing things like creative work, but if it's an academic or a scholarly piece, I would say you really want to try to get it published by an online only legitimate journal, which is kind of basically self-publishing in many ways, or try and pitch it to a traditional paywall or open access journal, or if it's a book, to a publisher, and you've always got the self-publishing thing to fall back on. But a lot of people self-publish and then no one reads it, and they don't get all the added benefits of being internationally distributed, working with a sales marketing team, working with an editorial team, getting all that peer review, all that development, all the writing development, especially if you're early career. The benefits of working with a publisher or a journal, whether they be independent or owned or whatever, there's a lot of them. So I would say you can always go back to self-publishing, but I'd pitch it to a bona fide publisher or a journal, even if they are, online only, community driven. That would be my take. It's a technical book geared toward a specific trade. Then that does sound perhaps more like it would be something that you could do a good job with self-publishing. The thing is, though, you need to have your own infrastructure in place. You need to have your own marketing plan in place. How are you going to reach your potential audience? If you've got key figures within that trade, if you can reach the people who are going to put it on reading lists, or maybe the journal or whoever is going to review it favorably, and then all the people within the trade are going to be like, Pipe Fitters Monthly or whatever, I need that book, then great. But if you don't have those connections, it's going to fall. It's not going to fall on deaf ears. It's going to fall on no ears. You've got to be able to reach the audience. So I guess my main question: can you, without the assistance of the traditional publishing industry, reach that audience? Because if you can't, then you're wasting your time. That's my take. That would be my take. If you can develop the channels to reach the audience, to reach the market, brilliant. Then why not give it a go? But if you can't, then you need to find the right publisher or the right publication who can do that for you, and who will reduce all that pressure and burden and still give you money and pay you. You know what I mean? So I would investigate. I would investigate maybe who's out there within the field before going it alone. And if you're going to go it alone, you have to be able to reach that audience. Otherwise, it's all a waste of time, in my opinion. But yeah, good question. Anything else? I know I covered rather a lot, and there's a lot to take in there. But again, I'm going to put my email address just in the chat here as well. And if anyone wants to speak to me privately or wants to share a proposal, then please do just drop me an email. Happy to have a Zoom or to chat. So that's my email address. I'm also just going to put in another link here while I've got you guys. So this is Intellect's Publish With Us page. So a lot of the information that I've delivered is available on here somewhere, but you can find our author questionnaire, our editor questionnaire. You can submit to a journal. We have 108 different journals there as well, and you can submit to them all directly. Do have a good look at the website, because there's a wealth and depth of free content, both in terms of how to publish, but also there's 108 journals with many free issues available. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can read for free there too. So do have a good look at the website, intellectbooks.com. And if you have any questions after the fact, then you can reach me at james@intellectbooks.com.